Today we're going to be looking at drawing value bars and forms. So form, remember, is taking those basic shapes and then adding a gradation value to it to make them look more realistic. When we're doing that, let's start with the bars. It's a little bit easier. We're going to start with a graphite pencil for this one. And for the first box, you want to make this as dark as you possibly can, which means you're pushing fairly firmly with your coloring tool when you're inside that first box. It's as heavy as you can push without breaking the tip of your coloring tool. You might have to go a couple different directions. You want to make that nice and solid and as dark as possible. If you go outside the lines at all, you can always just erase that part and clean it up. As you move across to the next one, you don't want to push quite as hard as you did on the last one, but you still want it to be dark. And the easiest way for me is I put down one layer and then I go back and I put another layer on top of it, because you want it to be just a little bit lighter than the last one. And it's a lot easier to put down another layer than it is to try and take off a layer when you're working on this. And I kind of keep eyeballing this one, right, the one that was before it, to make sure it's not the same and that it's a little bit lighter. And I also keep an eye on this one up here, so that as I'm making my way across, each time I color in a box, I'm pushing a little bit less on that pencil. And you can see I'm keeping my hand pretty far back up my pencil. I'm not keeping it way down here where I can't see what's going on. I keep it further back, and that allows me to have a little bit more control over how much I'm pushing down with that pencil lead. And while we call it pencil lead, there isn't lead in pencils anymore. Just so you know, it's graphite, which is a safer medium for us to be using in art. And as I come across and I have to get really light, it does get more difficult. If it helps you to turn your paper as well, and to turn the way that you're holding the pencil, I'm resting my hand on the table. That helps me to not put as much pressure on the tip of my pencil and to put more pressure on my hand. It also gets a little bit scratchier. I leave more white gaps in between, and I'll show you how we're going to deal with that in just a minute. And I keep looking back and forth between these two, trying to get them to be the same. By the time you get down here, you shouldn't have to color in this last box at all, right? Now, if I want to go back and smooth these out, I can use my finger and just rub a little bit. And I'm going to start with the lightest one and work my way down, because if I start with the darkest one and work my way up, I'm just going to be carrying all of that pencil graphite up into the lighter ones, and I don't want to make it too light. So if I go back through and I do this, it helps smooth them out just a little bit. There we go. And if I went outside the lines at all, again, I can grab an eraser or use the one on my pencil and just clean up outside those lines. Tap our paper, or you can gently brush it to get those off. So now we've done our value bars. Same thing when we go down here to the gradation, except we're not going to do it in chunks. We're going to push hard and just get more and more gentle as we move across. I did a graphite pencil for the first one. For this next one, I'm going to use a colored pencil because it feels a little bit different, and you can't blend a colored pencil like you can blend a graphite pencil. So again, I'm going to start pretty hard, which means I might put a couple layers down while I'm doing this. The other thing I like to do to keep inside the lines on this side, I put my finger here so that the pencil taps my finger and stops at that line. That's one of those things that I can do to stay inside that line and not have to worry about trying cleaning it up later. And as I move across and I get lighter and lighter with that pencil, it's starting to fade a little bit because I'm not pushing quite as hard, so that by the time I get down here, I'm barely touching the edge of that paper. Now, I still have some gaps, don't I, along here, so I can turn it sideways and go back through. And I'm going to lightly go across, hard, medium, lighter, to fill those in. And if I'm still not quite happy with it, I'd like to see this stretched a little darker, a little longer to match up here. I'm going to go back on top and push a little harder and add another layer. And this time I'm going to push harder further out to add that next layer on, and then, oops, get a little bit lighter and lighter. I turned my pencil there so it was touching more pencil pigment to the paper than it was before, and I'm going to Like I said, layering so that you don't get it too dark too quickly is definitely the easier way to go versus trying to erase it. And colored pencil doesn't like to erase at all. Graphite pencil likes to erase a little bit once it's dark. And then I can come back through and smooth that out very carefully so that it's going from that dark to light in our gradation. Now we're at this part, how we did this dark to light. This was chunked. We don't want to use the chunked. This one's this nice gradation from dark to light. We're going to add that to each of these to make them look 3D. And this time I want you to use the chalk pastel pencils that are at your tables. And it shows us here that our light source is on this side, right? So that the light is going to be shining and reflecting here, which would mean our shadows are going to be darkest on the opposite side. So if my light source is coming this way, the brightest part is going to be the top of my cube. This side over here is going to be in the shadows. It's not going to be totally dark because some of that light will bounce off the table and reflect back, right? But this will be a darker side since the opposite side of that sun or that light source. And remember, when you're using chalk pencils, that they are pretty soft. So you don't want to put a whole lot of pressure on it right away. It's better off to layer it in a little bit so that you get the hang of how hard you can push without getting messy. And then this one on this side is going to have a shadow as well because the light can't go through the box. It's a solid box, but it is going to get a little bit darker as it moves towards the bottom. Here and here. Now, because this is a chalk pastel, we can definitely go back in and blend this out with our finger to make it look nice and smooth. And these do erase as well, so if you go a little over the edge, it's not that big a deal. We can go back and we can erase it. And we want to keep the top nice and bright white because that's where our light source is. So I'm definitely going to go back and erase there. And then if it went a little outside here, I can erase on all those angles as well. Now, it won't erase a whole bunch. If you get really dark, it won't go in and pick up all of that chalk. It'll just pick up a little bit, so you still want to be careful to stay inside your lines as much as possible. Now we have a sphere. Our light source is still going this way, so the whitest part is going to be right here where that light's shining on it, and the darkest part is going to be back here on this side. So I have trouble coloring at that angle. I'm going to turn my paper. And you'll notice when I'm coloring these, I'm also coloring them the same direction that they are moving. So a sphere or a circle is round. So I try and add my chalk pastel in on that same arc or that roundness so that it really accents the shape that I'm trying to show you or the form that I'm creating. And again, I'm going to start kind of medium and go lighter because remember, we can blend these with our finger. And then I'm going to go back and add a little bit more dark. And I leave almost a tiny medium gap right here. Why do you think there's a gap right there? If my sun's shining this way, it hits the ball, it's going to bounce back off this table and cause just a little bit of reflected light to be on the bottom of that sphere. So now I'm going to go in and blend that. I can even color this in a little bit, but I don't want to get rid of the white completely because I should have a reflection spot, right, for where my light was coming off of my light source and reflecting off that ball. And then I can go through and erase any of the extras that went outside. I'm trying to be careful not to smudge my cube while I'm at it. I'm going to go ahead and get those little pieces off of there. Okay. And then this one I can take and turn into a cone. So if our light's shining this way, again, light reflective part, and then on the back side, you're going to have the darker shadow that's on there. I'm going to go through and layer it in a little bit. And then I can work it in with my finger. And again, I have to leave bright white somewhere. I don't want to color it in completely with the purple, but I definitely want it darkest back here on the back side. Go through and erase the extras that popped outside. Now, if all of these are really forms and they're 3D, and there is a light source over here shining this way, they should also all have what with them on the ground? They should all have shadows. And the shadows are a similar shape to the form. So if we're doing a sphere, it's going to have a bit of a circle or an ellipse, elongated oval underneath it. And that's going to be dark, dark when you do that. If you have a cone, it's a really skinny triangle that comes off of there because it's similar in shape. And if you have a cube, it's going to be very similarly a cube shape or square that comes off of it. And again, want to make sure those are nice and dark because those are the shadows that are going to be the darkest part of each of these. Okay. And they rest coming out from underneath and then out to the edges. They don't go on top because the shadows are being cast from the object, right, from the form. So once it's all nice and neat and completed, we're going to put those into Artsonia as evidence that you practiced creating a gradation bar or a value bar, a gradation bar, and then your forms.